Hello everyone, I am Dr. T. Bhargava Ramu, Assistant Professor, EEE, MLR Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. Today we will discuss underground cables topic, which is one of the topic in power systems. Usually it comes in power systems 1. So underground cables are very useful in practical life. So we are going to discuss regarding underground cables in today's topic. So in today's discussion, we will discuss regarding introductory part of underground cables and comparison between overhead lines and underground cables and properties of insulation materials, then insulating materials used in cables and classification of cables and types of cables and advantages and disadvantages of cables, and at last conclusion part of the underground cables. So first, we will discuss regarding introductory part, why electric cables are generally used and an electric cable consists, what are the parts. So generally an electric cable consists conductors and insulation for that conductor. So usually conductors are made with stranded copper or aluminum conductors. As shown in this figure, so this is a stranded conductor which is having 4 cores in it, stranded copper conductors. So stranded means in stranded conductors generally not a single strand will be there, multiple strands will be present in a conductor. Either we can use aluminum stranded conductors or copper stranded conductors. So these conductors are insulated with insulating material. To insulating material, why insulation is needed? So this insulation is needed for we should not interfere that conductor to the external disturbances like storms, lightning, ice, trees, etc. or man to conductor also. So this insulation part is important for a conductor in case of underground cables. If you touch the conductor, it should not give any shock to us. So to avoid that, so if you take any conductor like this, so over this insulation will be present, so that is the reason, so insulation is needed. So generally an underground cable consists of conductors as well as insulation over it. Coming to next thing. So generally in nowadays growing density of the power consumption means, so loads are day by day continuously increasing. So for these purpose, so in towns, so we need to go for underground cabling only instead of overhead transmission line. So if you make up everything as a underground cabling, so the appearance will be good. Because of increasing loads, we need good appearance for the town. Underground cables are needed, and these underground cables will give rugged construction. Rugged construction means, so like it has shown in the figure. So cables are buried under the ground, either in duct model or in normal model. So these constructions are generally rugged in case. Next, these underground cables give greater service reliability. Means, so once if you lay the underground cables, it can withstand years together without any disturbance, because so these cables will not disturb any outside things, and safety also increases. Instead of overhead transmission line, underground cables gives greater safety, because so cables will not be visible to us. All cables will be, as shown in the figure, all cables will be buried in under the ground. and next trouble-free service also. So we cannot expect faults in cables generally. So in case of overhead lines, faults may occur continuously. Frequent faults will occur. Frequent fault will occur in overhead transmission lines. But in the case of underground cables, fault cases will be very, very less. And next, cables may be buried directly in the ground or may be installed in ducts. As shown, this figure is showing that directly burying case, and it may be buried like this, in this as shown in the figure in duct. This is duct laying, and this figure shows permanently burying laying. Right, coming to next part. So if you compare an overhead transmission line and underground cable, we can analyze in all these factors. In case of construction, in case of size of the conductor, voltage carrying capacity, fault detection. So if you see the construction, so generally underground cable construction is a little bit difficult, because we need to take out the land, we have to take out the land, and we have to take a duct, we have to make a duct and bury in that one, and again we have to cap that complete setup. But in case of overhead lines, simply we can erect the transmission lines over the poles. That is the easy thing. So in case of construction, a little bit difficult for underground cables, and overhead transmission line erection is easy. If you see the size of the conductors also, we can set up any size of the conductor over a overhead line. But in case of underground cables, we need to go for restricted size, because restricted sizes will give the different power transmission capacity. So size of the conductor also varies if you compare with overhead lines and underground cables. And voltage carrying capacity. So if you compare voltage carrying capacity in overhead line and underground cable, so generally voltage carrying capacity will be more in case of overhead line, a little bit less in case of underground cables. Next, fault detection and repair. Generally, in case of overhead lines, faults may happen frequently, because overhead lines are open to air. There may be storm, there may be ice falling, there may be fault due to a tree fallen on the overhead line. So faults may frequently occur in case of overhead lines. But in case of underground cables, all cables are buried under the ground, so we cannot expect, and frequent faults may not happen in case of underground cables. But detection is easy in case of overhead lines, and detection is very difficult in case of underground cable. If any fault happens somewhere in the underground cable, we have to dig the earth, and we have to trace out the fault where it happens, and repairing also is little bit difficult in case of underground cables. Faults may occur very less frequent. If fault happens, the repair will take much time. Detection and repair will take much time. But in case of overhead lines, faults may happen very frequent, and detection repair will be easier. And if coming to public safety, OH lines are not that much safety, because all those overhead conductors are open in air, but underground cables are completely buried in the ground. So public safety is very easy in case of underground cables. Interference. So coming to interference means overhead lines generally interfere with the TV signals and radio signals, telecommunication signals. But in case of underground cables, interference will not happen at all, because these communication signals and everything are in the air only. And next, in the case of voltage drop, so there are different voltage drops, and in case of OH and underground cables. So voltage drop will be less in case of OH cables, OH lines, and in case of underground cables, voltage drop will be more. So these are the different aspects if you compare OH and underground cables. Coming to Again, comparison, specific comparison. If you take a specific comparison, so this figure shows overhead transmission model. It is conductors are erected on the towers. If you see this figure, if you see this figure, underground cables are buried on the road of street lights. This green color line is representing underground cable. So these are the two photographs are representing overhead transmission line, underground cables. If you see overhead lines, inductance plays a predominant role in overhead lines. Overhead lines generally consist inductance values. Line parameters, inductance plays a major role, and insulation cost is less in overhead lines. So there are no insulation is needed for overhead transmission lines. Only at the place of poles, towers, insulators are needed. Very less cost of insulation is in case of overhead lines, and erection cost is also very less. Simply we can erect the towers and we can tie the conductors on transmission lines. Erection cost will be less. So in all these cases, if you see underground cables, in case of underground cables, inductance value will be very less, and insulation cost will be very more, and erection cost also more in case of underground cables. Underground cables gives greater safety than overhead lines. Already we discussed, underground cables gives greater safety and public for better outlook also. So in a city, if you make everything as underground, so nothing will show, nothing will happen in the city. Next, in submarine crossings also, generally underground cables are used in submarine crossings also, and somewhere in tunnels also it is very useful. Underground cabling or open cabling also, the cables are very useful in case of tunnels as well as in case of submarine crossings. And interference also with antennas and communication signals, it is very less. Interference also very less in case of underground cables. So these are the comparisons between UG and OH cable. So if you see, in case of underground cables, insulation plays a predominant role. Insulation plays a predominant role. So insulating material should have some properties. So we cannot use any material as insulation material. That insulating material should have particular properties only. So if you see one by one, it should have low thermal coefficient. So if you keep on using underground cable, it may give some temperature. The temperature may rise, the conductor temperature may rise. So the insulation should have good thermal coefficient, then only it will withstand. And it should not absorb any water, because underground cables are buried in the under the ground, so it should not any water. And permittivity of the conductance permittivity also should be more in case of underground cable. And non-inflammable, that means suppose if any spark comes within the underground cable, if any short circuit happens, so it should not be inflammable. That over the conductor, that insulation will be there, no, that insulation should not inflammable. It should have very less inflammable property. And chemical stability. So why chemical stability is one of the factor means, so if you lay the cable under the ground, so there may be chemical compositions within the acids and alkalis, in the moisture, within the sand or within the earth. So with all these things, cable should not have any interaction. Interaction means any chemical reaction should not happen to the insulation. So chemical stability is also one of the important topic. And next, high mechanical strength. So if you lay the conductors, and over the conductors vehicles may pass and men may pass, so load will come on the roads. So generally it should have a good mechanical strength also. And high viscosity, impregnation temperature, so viscosity value should also high, and capability to withstand high rupturing voltages. Rupturing voltages means sometimes it may happen in case of transients in the conductors. So rupturing voltage will generate. So to these rupturing voltages, it should have a capability to withstand. And next, high tensile strength. So and plasticity means, so tensile strength and plasticity means a cable should have a sometimes you may cabling may be like this, laying may be like this, some turning may happen. So to all these things, the tensile strength is important factor. The insulating material should have a tensile strength and plasticity, so that we can easily bend the cable as of we want. And next, coming to the insulation resistance also. So insulators also should have a high resistance value. So high insulation resistance is needed. Otherwise, leakage current will come out from the conductor. If a cable is like this, if insulation is very less, the leakage current will pass like this. So if you have high resistance, this IC value almost becomes 0. Next, high dielectric strength is needed to avoid the electrical breakdown. So if dielectric strength is more, so breakdown will be very less of the in case of underground cables. And next, hygroscopic, it should not absorb moisture from air or soil. So from soil or air, it should not absorb any moisture. So these are the important properties. All these properties an insulating material should have. So without these properties, cable will not withstand long term. So to have a long term service, a cable insulation should have all these properties. Coming to the next discussion, insulating materials. What kind of materials are used in insulation? So if you see this diagram is showing one kind of insulating material, and this is showing one kind of insulating material, and all these conductors are with different colors. Insulating materials are designed. So what are these? So generally, rubber is one of the item we can use it as a insulating material. Rubber is one of the item we can use it as a insulating material. Over the conductor, either copper or aluminum, over the conductor we can use rubber as a insulating material. Otherwise, next item is vulcanized Indian rubber. This is also one kind of rubber, but it is vulcanized rubber. If you see, vulcanized rubber is give better performance than rubber. So nowadays, and in advancements, vulcanized Indian rubber is used as a insulating material. Next, impregnated paper. So if you see, this is impregnated paper. It is impregnated paper. This is. So it is one kind of paper which is manufactured especially to use in insulating the electrical cables. If you see, you can observe in transformers also, in between primary and secondary winding, impregnated paper is used as a insulating material. Next, coming to the polyvinyl chloride, PVC. So these are all PVC pipes. You can see in for water pipelines also we are using PVC pipes. So same kind of material is used as a insulating material in case of underground cables. So these are the 4 kinds generally useful under the underground cables insulation purpose. Next, coming to classification of cables. So classification of cables means we are using different cables for different purposes. Like domestic purpose we are using cables. Next, suppose if you take in a company, within the firm, they will lay the cables from transformer yard to the load places, and sometimes these underground cables are using for street lighting purpose. If you see on the roads of the town, underground cables are using for different types. And next, for substation to the transformers also in some places underground cabling. If you see the gated communities nowadays, everything is underground cabling they are using. So there are some classifications based on the usage, based on the voltage, different types. So if you see, initial classification classified into 2 ways according to type of insulating material used. So generally, if you see class A, class B, class C installations are there. Class A, class B, class C installations. Based on the insulating materials types used, the manufacturer will give the type of the material cable. And next, voltage for which they are used. Are you using for 220 volts? Are you using for 11 volts, 20 volts, 11 kV, 33 kV, like that? For different voltages, underground cables are used. That is one kind of classification. If you see here, different types of cables are there. The diagram, different types of cables are there for different purposes. So if you go for cables under later on and classical latest classification according to LT cable, HT cable, ST cable, like that they classified. So LT cable means low tension cable. It can be used up to 1000 volts. And next, HT cable up to 11,000 volts. 1000 volts, and this is 11,000 volts. And next, ST cable, super tension cable. It can be useful for 23,000 volts to 33,000 volts, 23 kV to 33 kV. Like that, based on different voltages, different classifications are given. If you see this this is a low tension cable. It is low tension cable up to 1000 volts. We can use such kind of cables. And this is ST cable, super tension cable. And this is extra super tension cable. And this is high tension cable. And this is extra high tension cable. Different cables are shown here for different purposes. So these are the classifications. Which are used for different purposes in a realistic life, in practical life. Right. Coming to next. So types of cables. How many types of cables are having in our regular life or practical life or manufacturing industries? A cable may have one or more depending on the conductors. We can classify. We can say type: single core cable type, 2 core cable type, 3 core and 4 core cable type. So we can see here in the diagram, this is a 3 core type. It is. We can see 3 conductors, stranded conductors. This is one stranded conductor. It is stranded conductor. And this is one more stranded conductor. 1, 2 and 3. 3 conductors are present. We can call this as a 3 core cable it is. And all these 3 conductors are insulated with red, yellow, like that. So you can see here, this is insulation, and over this again some more insulation is there, over this again black insulation is there. So different model of insulations depending on the voltage and depending on the usage. And this is multi-core, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 cores are there. Like that, different single core, 2 core, 3 core, 4 core, like that we can, cables may have different types based on the usage. If you see, and in the coming discussion, advantages and disadvantages of the underground cables. There are some advantages as well as disadvantages also there. Coming to advantages, less subject to damage from severe weather conditions, mainly lightning, wind and freezing. So as we discussed, underground cable may not damage because it is completely buried within the ground. So less subjected to the damage. Damage case is very less, unless there is any fault happens in different places. Otherwise, cable will not damage. So especially lightnings. In case of rainy seasons, we may expect lightning and wind and freezing. In case of winter season, freezing also will not happen in case of underground cables. And next, pose no hazard to low flying aircraft or to wildlife, because cables are completely buried, so it won't create any interference with flying objects, aircrafts. So sometimes you can see if any airport or airstrip is there, so they will tell near to airstrip, near 4-5 kilometers, no conductors, no overhead lines are allowed. So in case of these cases, you can make a underground cables, not overhead lines. So in such places, so flying aircrafts also will not disturb with this underground cables, and much less subject to the conductor theft and illegal connections also. So if you make an overhead transmission line, conductors may be theft and illegal connections may be taken in some places. So to avoid these things, underground cables are very useful. So these are some advantages. Apart from this, other advantages also there. These are the main advantages in case of cables, underground cables. If you say disadvantages, there are some disadvantages also. In addition to the advantages, underground cable locations are not always obvious, which can lead to unweighted diggers damaging cables or being electrified. So suppose if you lay an underground cable like this over a road. So if any other purpose like drainage purpose or water pipeline, drinking water purpose or some other telecommunication cable purpose, if you dig this area, underground cable may be damaged. So we cannot represent all the in all places underground cable is present, This is one of the disadvantages. So cable is not visible outside. So if diggers will damage the cable. And next, coming to the operations are more difficult since the high reactive power of underground cables produces large charging currents and so make voltage control more difficult. So underground cables will create reactive power, more high reactive power, and leakage current also in case of underground cables is more. So these two cannot be avoided and these two cannot be controlled because underground cables creates reactive power, high reactive power and charging currents also. So to control these two things, it is a little bit tough task. And coming to another disadvantage, undergroundings is more expensive since the cost of burying cables at the transmission voltage is several times greater than overhead lines. Suppose if you take an overhead transmission line, 1 lakh rupee, for example, 1 lakh rupee for a 1 kilometer, let it be. So in case of underground cables, you need to spend more than that, means 10 lakhs you need to spend, 10 times like that. So cost of the erection is underground cable is more than overhead transmission line. This is also one of the disadvantage. But if you once lay the underground cable, the life will be more generally. Coming to next topic. So these are the different discussions we made under introductory part as a cables, and in conclusion we can say underground cables are often an affordable and justifiable solution for critical parts, and in some cases the entire length of overhead high voltage power lines. Generally underground cables are very justifiable things. That means if you spend money, the lifetime of the underground cable will be more than overhead transmission line. Overhead transmission line may get damaged over a period of 1 year or 6 months. Continuous faults and continuous damage will happen in case of overhead transmission line than underground cable. So with appropriate technology used in appropriate places, the environmental impact of underground cables can be minimized. So if you take the latest technologies to lay the underground cables, the environmental impact also will be very less. So these are the final conclusions related to the underground cables. So today we discussed regarding introductory part of the underground cables, and we discussed regarding comparison between overhead lines and underground cables, and properties of insulating materials used in cables, different types of materials, and classification of cables depending on voltage and insulation, and types of cables, and advantage, disadvantages. So these are the introductory level topics in underground cables. So in next video we will come up with some other topic related to underground cables. So these are the different diagrams you can see. This is direct laying underground cable. This is duct laying underground cable. So these are the transmission lines underground cable system in a town, and these are the material, polymetric material for cable insulation. This is these are materials, granules of that material, and impregnated paper, PVC, and different insulations, and these are the different types of cables. These are also different types of cables, and it is insulating, different insulations are given, 3 parts. So these are the advantage and conclusion part. So thank you.